why don't we get started? And then, people trickle in. It's fine. We're recording this conversation. Joe, pleasure having you in this conversation. It's June 4th, 5 p.m. Eastern. And this is part of the kind of the weekly New York Information Security Meetup / the Cyber Guild. And, it's a great pleasure to host you here with the group. The purpose of this conversation is really to get a glimpse of entrepreneur like yourself in the cyberspace. You obviously done a lot and currently you're leading a company. And I'd like to get insight to that. So I'm just going to be having conversation, asking a couple of questions, and we'll kind of walk through, a few topics, including maybe some current events like we just did. Maybe we can even cover a couple of, conspiracies. That would be cool. And, and then feel free for anybody who's joined us, feel free to ask questions and type in some questions in the chat line. So why don't we get started? I typically ask that question as an icebreaker, and so what's your favorite superhero and why? And I'll add that as a caveat to that is that your significant other, your parents, and religious figures do not count.
All right. Well, if I exclude those different options, it's always tempting because I love The Incredibles and I love Mr. Incredible. However, I would have to say Aquaman. And Aquaman, whereas Mr. Incredible tries to solve all these different things, Aquaman is a specialist and he's an expert at what he does. And also I have a pretty significant swimming background, so as a competitive swimmer and all of that. And so Aquaman, with his specialization and expertise and unique skill, and so you want to create that differentiation when you're building a company. And Aquaman brought a unique skill that made the team better. And I kind of think if I align what RunSafe's doing and the differentiation we're doing, it's we got a really, really differentiated product that can elevate everyone's game a bit from cybersecurity perspective. And so Aquaman's amazing. He can hold his breath forever, swim. He can send signals, but he brings a way to just get things aligned and save the world through water. So
that's a good one. So do you so for RunSafe, I guess you have a lofty goal to save the world as well. And we can talk about it a bit, but about what the company does and the goals and so on. So why don't we kind of jump into, if you don't mind sharing a bit about your career path, and I find it fascinating, that people that are entrepreneur like yourself that decided to jump in with 2 feet into the space, which is not easy. A lot of times you have options. You've worked in the past and you had some very senior roles, and you could have probably done very well for yourself working for someone else. And you've decided to take the plunge and go in and create something from scratch, basically, and join that journey, which is a lot of people describe as a roller coaster ride. So if you don't mind just giving us maybe kind of start kind of where you started and maybe kind of walk us through that path.
Yeah, great. I mean, entrepreneurship is it certainly is a roller coaster. My business partner and colleague Doug Britton likes to say it's a violent sport at times, which I fully subscribe to. But if I go back to kind of the beginning of my career, I was really I was a management consultant in the 90s, and I was always kind of a quant kind of guy. I used to build models for organizations, financial institutions, and I sort of got burned out of that. And I got burned out of it because we kept producing things and then starting from scratch with the next client and kind of building things, but never really seeing things through to the end. And as a management consultant, you kind of go in and out from different programs. And so I got the entrepreneurial bug early on. I think I was 27, started my first company. And only had modest gains and success, but was able to sell the company and then joined a company where I learned a ton, and that was at Targus Info as a part of the management team. And we went from 0 to north of 100 million in revenue, pretty significant exit. Neustar bought the company in 2011, and for me personally, that's where I really kind of grew up professionally. And what I learned was sort of the fundamentals of building a great company. And I like to tell people in our own company, we talk about this. One of the great things about being an entrepreneur and being in an early stage company is you kind of put yourself out there and you're taking some risk. And when you take that risk, I like to call it plowing the dirt with your face, because the path forward is not always perfectly clear. You can't just drive down the road to success. And sometimes you get, knocked down a bit. But plowing the dirt with your face is sort of a mindset that our company has. And it means push forward, take a little bit of risk. And that's one kind of pillar. And then the second pillar really is, something, just our whole company is getting into around standard products and standard services. So I learned all these things when I was at Targus Info, because these are the kinds of disciplines we had there. But the great thing is after Neustar bought Targus Info, I started helping different cybersecurity companies, and the attorneys at Wilmer Hale, who are always our corporate attorneys in both my companies, introduced me to Doug Britton going back 4 or 5 years ago. And, we kind of got together around a common alignment, which was, kind of one of the not so much saving the world, but really changing the economics of cybersecurity from the attacker's perspective back to the defender's perspective, and doing something in a way that shifts the ecosystem tremendously in a very easy to deploy way. And so at the foundation of what RunSafe is built on an economic principle of, totally changing the game for attackers in terms of the amount of effort they have to go through to do the damage that they seek to do. So I hope that answers the question. That's the progression. A lot of success at Targus Info, and I learned from it, and then had the great fortune of meeting Doug and having that kind of common framework. And then we've built the company ever since.
Is it something like, you see in the movies sometimes where people imagine where you're like sitting in Starbucks and you grab a napkin and start jotting down? Doug was like, oh, let's do this. These are the 5 things we're going to solve. Or is it something like that? Or is it more elaborate than that?
No, I think it might be even a little different. Doug had amazing ideas and was doing a ton of security research and building security products. And it had brilliant ideas and brilliant capabilities, and he's masterful himself. And then I think what I brought was a way to bring that to market in a way, and it was sort of like peanut butter and jelly in that sense. The combo was what was powerful. So then what kind of united it was that, changing the economics from the defender's or the attacker's perspective to the defender. That was kind of a uniting theme, but it was really complementary skills and experiences and different levels of expertise between us that I think made the idea to push forward with RunSafe. He had built, different security products, and we launched RunSafe to, bring that stuff to market.
Mm-hmm. And did you guys date before you moved in, or was it strictly what was that process? No, because I'm very curious, because it's fascinating. You're absolutely correct. You bring in complementary skill sets, and you decided, but it's a huge endeavor. Lifting something like this off the ground is in basically tying your destiny with someone else.
Yeah.
And so I'm assuming that process also took a little while.
Yeah, right? It played out over time, because I was doing some stuff. Doug was doing some stuff. He was able to sell, some technology and some products he built to Samsung. So he was working on all of that, and I was going out and thinking about the go-to-market strategies and things like that for RunSafe. And really, over a period of time, we really got to know each other well, and we found sort of the sweet spot of the kinds of technology we could bring to market. And I think that identification of a go-to-market strategy, I would say, was around June of 2017. We had known each other 2 or 3 years prior to that. Mm-hmm. And so by June of 2017, kind of the current form of what RunSafe's all about, that idea sort of crystallized. And I would say, that's when history began for RunSafe, the company, going forward.
Right. So you run the company, you basically decide to take ownership and run as a CEO of the company. What's your day-to-day look like, and your responsibilities right now for running the company full time, and it's a startup in the cyberspace. Like what, and then maybe you can walk us through like things that you like about it, what makes you, what excites you, and maybe some of the things that maybe don't excite you as much.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the cool things we're doing right now as a company that has become a daily discipline is really how do you bring something to market? And we've got so many different use cases as a company that we can solve for. And what we really want to do is find those use cases that are repeatable, that we have a standard delivery for. And so in saying that, it gets to part of the day-to-day. So as a company, we have what we call a tiger team internally. It's different leaders of different parts of our company, and every day we get together around a go-to-market meeting, and that really sets the tone for the company. We're defining the priorities of solutions that we want to offer. It helps the engineering team prioritize what we're going after. It helps our sales team know where the best opportunities are as a company. So the tiger team is an internal go-to-market team, and we have a daily meeting. And then so I love that aspect of it, and I love the aspect of really kind of digging in deep and making sure we build the company for success around those use cases that we're building for in the tiger team, and using that as a way to really organize how best to go to market as a company. So I love that aspect. A lot of creativity, a lot of team contribution to it, and some clarification around the solution, the way we bring the solution to market. So that part's amazing. We've started to grow, and a lot of the administrative things that we used to do, that stuff gets old sometimes. So fortunately, we have an assistant now to take on some of that stuff. And what I've realized as we've gotten past our Series A financial investment is picking and choosing the best things in the day to spend my time on, and those are sales, building the brand, clarifying the product roadmap, and our go-to-market strategies. And if I spend my time on those items, then everybody else, it kind of sets the right tone for everybody else to know where the priorities are as well. So that's how I look at it.
So if you if you could have put emphasis on the one thing that you really think makes an impact for the organization that you do, what is that? From all the, because you obviously have a lot of responsibilities, and just sort of curious, what do you think like actually moves the needles the most from the everyday things that you do?
Well, one of the things I've done with the company is everybody in the organization goes through sort of a sales training, and I call it the lessons from the School of Hard Knocks. And it's part of that building that culture, part of that kind of go-to-market mindset and plowing the dirt with your face and the like. But I think really understanding how to bring something to market and how to position the sale and how to pull through the product. It's not just the technology, but it's really about the use case and why the customer finds that valuable. And so I have this whole discipline around lessons from the School of Hard Knocks, and it's the 20 or 25 mistakes I've made repeatedly over 20 or 25 years in trying to bring something to market. And whether it's sales or how you go about your business going to market, I think those lessons become very, very powerful. And so I think on a day-to-day basis, since everyone has seen what those are, and when we see them play out as a company, I kind of hear echoes back of some of those lessons along the way. And it's in those ways, I think, if we have the mindset of a standard repeatable product and really good sales discipline, then we can be a great company. And obviously building a business is way more than that. But if I had to point to one thing, it's elevating the focus around those items and building a benchmark for what we strive for in those areas.
So it's fascinating. So those rules or those lessons that you learned, and it's fascinating that you basically are taking those and now applying that to the business and trying to get everybody to that level and almost have them learn from your mistakes. Like if you could pick like one or two of these mistakes that you feel are the most important to success, and things that you've done wrong and now not to do or do differently, what would be be like the top one or two of these?
So I'd say one. I'll give you two. So one is, I've never been a natural salesperson, but I've worked at it really hard. And I think I figured it out to a pretty good degree. And one of the keys is, you really need to let the customers share with you why they think your product's valuable. And that's a simple thing on the surface, but it's hard to do because we all want to get our thought across and tell someone how great our product is. And the discipline is really asking the right question to learn if the customer agrees with you. And that's one where I always used to try to tell people why it's so valuable. But asking that question and getting them to tell you, that changes the whole selling process in my book. Mm-hmm. And so that's a big one. And I guess there's others, but the one I like also in the selling process is sort of what I call happy ears. And it goes along the lines of, you did so much talking and the other person was nodding, but you never learned anything. And then when they asked one question, you have the happy ears to think they're interested, but you haven't done any of the other aspects to really find out if your product's even a fit for them. And you can waste a lot of time as a company, doing that. So, those are two examples in the sales process that come to mind as two of the 25 lessons in there.
Yeah, it makes total sense, and it's amazing that you're applying, some of your mistakes, and the fact that you mentioned that you say, okay, I'm not a natural salesperson, but then I had to learn, and I'm assuming as a CEO right now, that's you're evangelizing, you're selling, and you're basically that you're promoting your business all times. So you mentioned that you raised Series A recently, which is really interesting because due to the COVID-19, things have changed, and even the environment around raising capital and so on has changed. Have your plan changed? After from what you proposed to investors right after, because you received the investment right after the COVID-19 happened?
Yeah, we closed our Series A round. We raised $10 million right at the end of January. And so, it's not that our plans have changed tremendously, but, all of our investors, we had lots of good advice. And we realized compared to other startups, one, we had some really good success. We have some marquee, groups we work with, whether it's Vertiv or Avison or, GE Aviation, and now Lockheed Martin's an investor. We had a lot of, momentum to build on. And we had just raised some money. So we realized, this is going to sound like a silly example, but in a down economy, I once met Ed Rendell, who is CEO of McDonald's, and they had a strategy in a down economy. And the strategy is they would, double their ad spend and offer a $1 quarter pounder. And they knew they could outlast their competition. And so internally, we took on a strategy to say, okay, this is a weird situation we're in. It's awful. There's a lot of setbacks and bad things going on. What would be our double down strategy to come out of this stronger? And where is that opportunity for us to really make a difference and expand our footprint? And we realized we can do some things complementary with Lockheed Martin and their suppliers who, Lockheed Martin, will want their supply chain to have security built in, and we can help do that. And then in other areas, we want to kind of seed the market, offering protections for open source software and make our tools available for DevSecOps or CI/CD software pipelines. And if we build the tools and the plugins for developers to be able to access our tools easily, we can take the time to do that because we just raised money. And we will emerge stronger as a result of that. And all the while, we've got a great business. There's still demand for our security products, one, because we're working with the DoD and weapons programs and the like, and they still have security needs that we can help resolve, even though there's a lot of areas in the market that are down. So if you think of raising money, having a good base of business with the Department of Defense, and having these areas of where we can extend our product development and distribute that technology so people can easily adopt us, then I think we're actually stronger than what our plans were in the absence of COVID, because we were going to go after the market in a traditional, hardcore selling way. And we've had to really dig deep and think about our packaging, our offers, our go-to-market. And that Tiger Team kind of concept I talked about earlier is really, bringing those disciplines to life in light of, the changes in given COVID.
It's fascinating. You know, it sounds your quarter pounder strategy is a little more involved than what McDonald did. But it's what's amazing. It's based on obviously the same principles, which I find really fascinating. So it makes total sense. You're greatly positioned to almost bank on it. Excuse my pun. And become successful. So what's changing in terms of implications around security right now in this kind of post pandemic world, and what do you think that are going to be the changes moving forward?
Well, naturally, when the pandemic hit and we had a sudden shock to our system, everyone started working from home. Most people are still working from home. There was a whole scramble around just enabling the home worker. And if you think of an enterprise with 10,000 employees or 100,000 employees, supporting that is a massive undertaking. And so first of all, whereas maybe compliance programs around working from home almost discouraged people from doing it because you had all these security, barriers, if you will, to make sure things are safe and protected. Suddenly we were forced into having to support it. So that was kind of phase one, where organizations started to accept that, hey, we have to extend our networks. We have to support the work from home world. And so now coming out of that, I think phase two is there's a lot of compliance driven things to make sure people remain in compliance now that we're emerging from work from home and supporting different areas where employees work. So there's a whole shift to make sure you're doing all the right things to stay in compliance. But I think longer term, like whatever that, and that's probably through the summer and things like that, we'll figure those things out. But long term, then there's definitely going to be a dramatic shift in a further acceleration of IT modernization and just modernization and investment. And with that accelerated investment, a big driver of that's going to be security oriented things. So cloud native stuff, or DevSecOps in cloud computing and containers. There's just more and more things that have to be packaged well as that investment takes place. So I think with the digital modernization budgets dramatically increasing, even beyond where they were before COVID, is going to drive a change in how security is adopted. And there's going to be a large appetite for security going forward because people can't afford disruption to business like they've experienced the past couple of months.
Right, especially business. If business relies, so heavily on digital, digital access and digital, both from employee side as well as customers. So you touched a bit briefly about the cloud computing and containers. What has changed? How security is changing in that area as well, and maybe this also impact due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Well, I think one huge driver also that's relevant in all this is sort of the movement to DevOps and DevSecOps and automating the build and deploy of compute of your software code. I think there's a stat out there that says 70% of Fortune 2000 companies are embracing DevOps as a discipline to manage the building and deploying of software. And so those steps from commit to compiling your code, to testing it, to packaging it for delivery, making containers and pushing it out, and having that ability to have portable code that goes to one or another cloud, or even in some cases deploy on-prem, that kind of flexibility. Obviously one of the trends with that is building security into the DevOps process. And what we've done, and as I was alluding to before with some of the plugins we built, we make it very simple for developers to insert security into that development process, that build and deploy process. And so if you're, one of the great things that we're doing, or the great opportunities for us to help solve is as you're creating code and pushing it out and sending it to the cloud, you want to protect your containers, you want to protect the software binaries, the web servers, the operating systems that are in those containers, and you want to protect that code at runtime when it's deployed, no matter where it goes. And there's a problem out there is if you just rely on your cloud provider for security, but that security could be different from wherever you send those containers, wherever that goes. And so there is a natural need to build security into your products so that you're not just relying on where that container ends up. And so building security in is one of the huge opportunities, and certainly a big opportunity for us. And we're making it very easy to do that, whether it's in an embedded Linux, way, with things like Yocto or inserting with JFrog in their binary repository, or just working in how you compile code and making it easy to insert protections in those containers.
So Joe, we danced around what RunSafe does, and maybe you can give us like kind of the elevator pitch. What exactly, how it is that you actually do these things, how it is that you protect, and what are the areas of where it fits. Because I think some of the dangers of a company that does many things and trying to find the use cases that sometimes you get like scope creep when when the company is testing it, because they get excited that, it does all those things. So maybe you can briefly describe what the company does specifically, how what problem do you solve, and then we dance around it.
Yep.
And then how you do it, and then maybe like the top 2 or 3 use cases that you've managed to narrow down.
Yeah, perfect. Well, so one of the great advantages of software, if you produce multiple versions of it, let's say it's your Linux operating system, or it's the software that runs on a fleet of drones, 100 drones, or on a Cisco router. One of the great things is software is identical from device to device to device, and it performs identically the same way on on each instance that gets deployed. But from a cybersecurity perspective, if there's a vulnerability in one of those instances, that same vulnerability exists in all those instances. So it gets back to what I said up front about changing the economics. An attacker just has to find one vulnerability and build an exploit, and they can use that same exploit, to attack any Cisco router at any financial institution, right? So what we do is we immunize software so that a vulnerability found in the lab and an exploit built in the lab can affect the system that's deployed at Bank of America or Citigroup or whatever, the router. And the way we do that is we make sure that each instance of software remains functionally identical, but we make it logically unique so that exploit can't find the vulnerability it's looking for in the first place. And in that regard, we eliminate an entire class of attacks on the software itself. And so we have a product called Alchemist that you can easily run your software through it, and in minutes have a functionally identical but logically unique version, so that the exploit built in the lab can affect the instance deployed out in the field. And with that, one of the things that's really cool is so we're protecting engine controllers in aircraft and on cars. We're protecting embedded software on weapons programs. So you think of a ground station or something else that if compromised could wreak havoc on, and from a national security perspective. And then if you are building an embedded Linux application on an IoT device, and you're using something called Yocto to manage that whole process, 3-4 lines of code, and every time you produce a new version of that, all the security protections can be added in automatically, so that every IoT device that has that embedded Linux software and application is functionally identical but logically unique. So at the end of the day, we immunize software without developer friction to enable continuous deployment and delivery of your software in a secure way.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you really are tackling a huge problem. I mean, the IoT vulnerability, embedded software is by far, I think, almost the biggest, like elephant in the room, where we continue manufacturing these devices, but security has always been an afterthought. Hence, we see a lot of these issues. So, and you talked about specifically about cars or aircrafts, and what consideration does security, specifically for these type of technology, like cars, aircrafts that maybe people don't know and not aware?
Well, one of the things about it is it's not just security itself. It's really safety and safety critical systems. There's a lot of standards out there, and we think we have kind of a leadership role in how you bring security into safety critical systems. And for example, from a compliance perspective, with some of these standards, you have to account for every known state in the software, in order to be in compliance. You have to say exactly what's going to happen. But we have this premise that a cyber attack is an unknown state. However, with RunSafe and with the protections we provide, we change that game for large manufacturers, whether it's a helicopter manufacturer, or an airplane manufacturer, or an engine controller maker. We assume there's a cyber attack that's going to happen, and when it does, we're providing the protection, but we're also classifying that as a known state, and the software knows exactly what to do because we're going to block the attack and they're going to recover. So we give a cyber attack a known state for this software in order to enable safety in these safety critical systems. Mm-hmm. So the key in those industries is safety, not so much security alone.
That's really interesting, and you've already have the software already embedded in several systems, right? So, would you brand it? It will say, secure by RunSafe. We'll have we'll be driving, a Ford one day. We'll say secure by RunSafe. Is that something you worked out with those companies?
Yeah, not really. No, obviously. But we have thought about it, and we do like to say we immunize software, and it's not just embedded systems. So we're protecting enterprise IT infrastructure. So operating systems, hypervisors, application or web servers, MySQL and Postgres database. So the same techniques for those embedded systems and those IoT systems can be applied for enterprise IT infrastructure. And if you're deployed in the cloud and you want hardened versions of those instances, deployed, whether it's in AWS or Azure, then you can incorporate our techniques into that infrastructure and provide that security automatically. So immunized software is what our mission is.
And it's amazing. So when you come over and you meet, security folks and you tell them, hey, we'd like to immunize your software, do they know what you're talking about? Is it something that they're aware of, or they just look at you with googly eyes?
There's still some explanation, but one of the things is, with the automation of build and deploy processes, one of the great challenges between dev and ops and DevOps or DevSecOps is, the cyber SMEs and experts, they want security built in. And in the old days, you would build all this code, and then the SME would come in and say, hey, you got to fix this or that, and then everyone go back to the drawing board. And that was never fun. No one likes it. Neither side likes it. So with DevOps, it's about a cultural change with software development teams and building security in. And so we really go to them and say, hey, you can immunize your software without developer friction to enable continuous deployment. And that is that's the kind of message that resonates. Mm-hmm, and so, naturally, it's a full picture around that. And you have to understand, what developers don't want to do is get a laundry list of things they have to fix, and then suddenly go back to the drawing board and do a bunch of fixes before releases can happen. And we think we can smooth that out. You still want to fix certain things, but we can provide, it's a risk management question. We can provide protections and smooth out your development process and your continuous delivery so we're not suffering that madness of patch management and bug fixes and all that in such a dramatic way that kind of wreaks havoc on organizations today.
And I'm sure it's in line with the ever-going pressure to release, have the next release, and there's always a pressure to go, and because it's a competitive edge, right? So if you're going to release a software or the app or the device as quickly as possible, and so the ability to embed security right into the process without going back and trying to do a bunch of fixes and revisions to the code, I think that's also bodes well for the software. So switching gears a little bit, who, in your opinion, who does security well today? In terms of companies, people, manufacturers, what are your thoughts?
There's a bunch of great companies doing things. There is a one company I'm really watching is MassMutual. And MassMutual has adopted DevOps and DevSecOps, and they have a bunch of different product development teams or developer teams, and they're implementing DevOps, and they're doing a great job. But their CISO Jim there, he brings such an amazing culture to an organization And he has great experience at Aetna and CVS and the like, and now he's at Mass Mutual, and he just does a great job of kind of blending cultures so that there's a lot of buy-in, and so I think their approach is amazing. It's both cultural, technical, and they see it as a partnership between the security ops teams and the dev teams, and I think that is a tremendous thing, in order to create security out, in your software, is if you take that holistic view and really take it from the top down and enable people from the bottom up, so to speak. So I really admire how they're doing it.
Yeah, and Jim Roth has always been a known figure in the industry to embrace new technologies and methodologies. I'm not surprised. So enterprise security has really changed in the past several years, and we see that continuous and maybe accelerating as well. If you had a crystal ball or some sort of device that can see the future, where do you think we're heading in the next several years?
Well, I think with the digital modernization, more deployments in the cloud, obviously automating build and deploy processes with DevOps and DevSecOps, and I think that kind of the connecting what you do in the development process with where things are deployed in your containers, and there's an opportunity for us. We're a natural fit for those cloud load protection platforms and whatnot, and that whole process from developer to instance or container instance that's in the cloud, that whole process of security in that world, and having that then be portable to other cloud instances or deployments. I think that's where everything's going. It's the digital modernization that's enabling acceleration of throughput in your development teams, pushing things on containers that are portable to different destinations, cloud providers or on-prem, and having security built in, and leveraging these workload protections ultimately. And the kinds of things we do to immunize software is a natural fit in that whole workflow, because we don't slow down developers. It's part of that value add for workload protection providers, and it provides runtime protection without slowing down or altering system performance in your cloud instance or what have you. So I do think that whole integration of capability is part of the future naturally. And then also I think one of the other things is doing the same kind of thing as I just described for enterprise stuff, but doing it for your manufacturing supply chain. And at every step, whether you're getting software from third parties or bringing in open source code, that naturally, a lot of the vulnerabilities in open source, go unresolved for a couple years or whatever. And I've got some interesting data around that. One of the last stats I saw was, 98% of open source code has vulnerabilities that haven't been resolved in like 3 or 4 years or something like that. But my point is, the software supply chain itself, where you're getting your open source, the weaknesses that are naturally a part of every software build, despite developers' best efforts, that happens. And then that whole that whole stack and the code that you are building and shipping to your customers, that software supply chain, at every step, just like with the enterprise IT to the cloud, the IoT devices and systems you ship to your customers, every step needs security built in, and you need a common way to inoculate and immunize software at every one of those steps. So I think that is going through a similar transformation, just as the IT infrastructure is changing with cloud deployments.
Do you see a positive change as well? I mean, the security industry, often gets kind of a bad rep in the sense that, companies, enterprise spends millions on securing the infrastructure, and then they still end up in the front page of the New York Times because they've lost, so many millions of records or got hacked. Do you feel that we are winning the battle, or we are somewhere in the middle? We're still fighting, or where are we with that process? Maybe like if there's a positive, spin to it. I don't know if that's something you can do.
I'm pretty optimistic, actually, but I do want to point out something and kind of bring it back full circle to where we started a bit, kind of changing the economics. And one of the premises we have when Doug and I, started was attackers are going to get in. They're going to breach networks. Insiders are going to get into your systems. supply chains are going to be compromised. And so defense in depth is needed, and protecting software is a critical aspect of that. But, all of that, tells me that with the changes we're talking about, DevSecOps and cloud computing and containers and the security we're building in, we're definitely going in the right direction. But what's been true, and I think the amount of spend we have on WAFs and firewalls and things like that is so disproportionate to the security industries overall, where protections could happen, that I think that there's going to be a shift in that spend going forward. And it's in these areas of DevSecOps and protecting your workloads and automate, or adding security into your supply chain. I think more and more money is going there, and it's realizing a defense in depth kind of strategy. And so that would be my angle of why I'm optimistic, because I already see signals that that's the direction things are going.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. It's fantastic, and I'm optimistic as well. I think we eventually will find a solution that would shift the balance with the adversaries. So kind of a general question before we wrap up, and maybe kind of talk about maybe some positive notes when we complete this conversation. What would you recommend to people wanting to get into the cybersecurity space, and then potentially be entrepreneurs as well?
Yeah, I think maybe it's a variation of the same answer if I take that into two kind of bites, if you will. So if you're trying to get into cybersecurity, I think learning some of the new technologies and kind of becoming an expert and specializing. I never knew specializing, like when I was 22, I thought specializing was a bad thing. I actually think it's a great thing to be an expert in something early on in your career, and you really figure things out, and you have a platform to work from. So if you really dedicate yourself to something that's really interesting to you, and you need to know where kind of the market's going and stuff like that, but specialization is something's a really good thing, I think, early in your career. And because it gives you a chance of a common platform to build from and learn all the other things that you might learn as a professional. And in the same way, for an entrepreneur, when you're building a company, there's so many things that goes into it. But having that, sort of that angle of your differentiation combined with why people want that differentiation, if you can nail that message, you've got a great start. And it's not why you think they'll do it, but it's why people say they're going to do it and why they do buy it. That's most important. So differentiation with understanding why from the customer's perspective. If you get those two things right, then you have, you've kind of specialized in something, and all the other aspects around building a business allows you then to have that same platform to expand and improve your outreach, your marketing, your sales. So that would be my variation of answers for two different, kind of.
And it makes total sense. So my my quick follow up to that would be, from specialization takes a little time, differentiation takes a little time, and like Wayne Gretzky said, well, yeah, I'm going where the puck is going, and not necessarily where the puck was. So how would you know where the puck is going and what to specialize in?
Yeah, it's a tough thing, and there's two schools of thought. You want to see what's kind of what's on the bleeding edge, and look at analyst research and different things of where things are going. But there's a lot of interesting things in sort of redefining things that have been around for a while and being a part of that. That also can be very interesting. So you just need to look for those opportunities and sort of spot the trend and see where there's a lot of repeatedness in whatever that specialization is. It's you don't want to just specialize in something that's so obscure no one else cares, right? So you do have to do some research ultimately, reading things that Gartner's doing, and talking to entrepreneurs, talking to founders, just networking in general. I think all of those things are super helpful, and test your ideas. And it's almost like, what I said earlier, plow the dirt with your face on going out and learning and, putting yourself out there and taking a bit of a risk, asking questions, learning, refining what you do, and having a hypothesis. Those all factor into kind of uncovering that area of opportunity for you, and you need to exercise it.
Yeah, absolutely love that. Plow the dirt with your face. I think that's a motive that I think would be very beneficial for for a lot of entrepreneurs and people that want to get into the industry. So kind of a wrap up, we're kind of running out of time, but we'll provide this video and then the contact for people to reach out to you and if they have a specific question. I saw a couple of questions were very specific to the technology. So happy to make the connection and have that available. Just for the COVID-19 specifically, maybe you can kind of wrap up in a positive note. What aspect of the current events and where we are right now that is that created a positive impact on you and maybe your family or your business that you not necessarily would have thought that it did. Hopefully there are a couple of things.
No, there's been a lot of positives despite the severity of the situation. Two things. So for the company, for RunSafe, we have two offices. We have an office in McLean, Virginia, and we have an office in Huntsville, Alabama. And it was almost like between our offices, it was point to point, and we had, let's call Huntsville and have a call, right? But we all shifted to work from home, and we use Zoom throughout the day, or other conferences. It became peer to peer, and that dialogue and adding video so that everybody could collaborate has had a great effect on our company. And I think it's brought us closer as a company. And there's been some innovations that have come out of it. I have this thing I call Coffee with Joe, pretty much every day from 2 to 3 or 3 to 4. And everyone in the company at different points has offered like a show and tell demonstration what they're working on. And I've had 3 of our interns show me the work they've done as part of their program. And these are phenomenal people, and they've delivered great things. And it's been very exciting to do that. And I don't know if we would have done it in the same way if we were still point to point. So peer-to-peer has been an amazing breakthrough for our company. The other side of it is, just at home, a couple of little games with the family and stuff like that, that we've made up because we don't go bowling or anything like that. So last weekend we had family badminton competitions and tournaments. Mm-hmm. And that's been kind of a pleasant surprise because, I wouldn't have expected my 17-year-old daughter, my 13-year-old daughter from being so competitive and excited to try to, smash that birdie down, when I'm out on the court. And so all that was a blast. And, that's been a pleasant surprise as well.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. I'm very happy to hear that. And, I love the fact that, we do find positive, outcomes for this pandemic. And hopefully, once the things come back to normal, the new normal, we'll be able to meet again in New York City, one of our events. So I really appreciate you taking the time to chat today. I think we gained some, very valuable insight, both on the company as well as your journey and, your views of entrepreneurships and success. It's been absolutely great. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, David. You do a great job. I love the forums you build, and delighted to be here. So thank you.
Thank you all. So thank you all for joining, and looking forward to seeing you all hopefully next week. So stay safe, everyone.